Good afternoon. I am back here at the All Saints Monastery, sitting down for another conversation with His Eminence Archbishop Lazar Puhalo, who is the founder and the abbot of the monastery. And today, His Eminence will discuss the demonic. Good afternoon, Your Eminence.
Good afternoon.
What is the demonic for you? What does demonic mean?
Well, we have to give kind of a perspective on it. I mean, it's something that we actually need to look at sometimes. And the reason I'm particularly interested in looking at it, because, in Constantinople, at one time, outside the city, they had a refuge for mentally ill people. And it was a refuge because they clearly understood a difference between mental illness and demonic possession. And so Irene Cristovalantu in her convent also had mentally ill women, and somehow they wanted to protect these people and give them some kind of decent life. They could eat and have a place to sleep and have some kind of clothing. But they did clearly understand the difference. Not completely, of course. There were some mental illnesses that they were ascribed to demons because you couldn't know exactly what they were. It's like in the scripture, the boy who his father brought him, the demon would throw him down. He would perhaps foam at the mouth, but he'd try to throw him. He could even fall into the fire or the water and be destroyed. But the icon for that feast reads, the healing of the epileptic, because epilepsy had been already defined by Hippocrates of Kos in centuries before Christ. So that was a known illness, and they called it the divine disease, because people who had epileptic seizures generally had also some kind of hallucinations with them that they interpreted as visions. Now, they made that distinction early on. So we understand now much better about mental illness, and it could be distinguished from demonic possession easily, but a person who comes to a priest and confession seems to be possessed by demons should first of all be taken to a medical professional to assess what is actually going on, and not just to presume that a person is demonized and needs to have an exorcism. Demons are taken far too seriously. St. Anthony the Great told us that there were like scorpions trodden underfoot by Christians. That depends on Christians conducting their lives in such a way that they could tread on the demons rather than shaking hands with them. But we do have to make a very clear distinction between what we think is demonic possession and what is actually mental illness, because we could actually kill people. And a few years in Romania, a few years ago, a priest did kill a woman while trying to exorcise the demon of schizophrenia from her. He was later arrested and given a prison sentence for homicide, perhaps involuntary homicide, but he did get quite a few years in prison for it. And she just was schizophrenic. And you can howl and shriek all day, but you can't cast the demons of schizophrenia out of a person, because we come to understand that disease more and more all the time. When you didn't understand it, you would presume it was demons because you would hear voices and hallucinate voices and hallucinate visual hallucinations as well. But as we understand these diseases more and more, we understand that they're precisely diseases, and usually a problem in the architecture of the brain or the electrochemical functions of the brain. We don't understand that one too much, but manic depression was also something that they once wanted to cast out demons for, because in one phase you're manic and hyper energetic, in another phase you go into deep depressions, which are sometimes look like a prelude to death. They're so severe. But now we find that if we give lithium supplements, lithium carbonate supplements, to a person who's bipolar, they can function fairly well. But we know that the thing that causes bipolar disorder is primarily a lack of lithium, the trace material of lithium in the person's system. And by supplementing them with lithium, we can get it pretty well under control. So a disease that responds to psychotropic medications is definitely not demonic. The thing that might be a little bit dangerous in our own day is that fundamentalists and sectarians are completely carried away by demons without any understanding. The man that the Speaker of the House, Johnson, lives with in the States, believes that, and has voiced that, the World Health Organization is demonic. The United Nations is demonic. NATO is demonic. So when you come up against that sort of ignorant fanaticism, and perhaps even the mental illness on the part of the person who's asserting those things, you can, and with a weak-minded person like Mr. Johnson, who can be manipulated so easily, and as Speaker of the House, he can cause a lot of chaos with this demon theory. And it's usually people are a bit weak-minded and hyper-superstitious who worry the most about demons. But when you take that into politics, into the political structure of the nation, as many Republicans have, you can cause extreme danger, especially if you can convince the person who holds the nuclear codes that a nation is totally demonic. The only thing to do is to bomb it out of existence, of course, just like the people who are liquidated in the Old Testament by the Jews, thinking that even the babies were demonized, so kill them all. And that was a monstrous episode and a monstrous understanding about demons. The other thing is that many of the passions we have are evolutionary artifacts. We sometimes behave like what we call lower animals in our own interhuman actions, our own communal actions. And somebody might want to possess that, to post out of somebody who's possessed by demons, when actually he's really doing something atavistic back. That we had developed in an earlier stage of evolution. We used to do those things, and they stick with us, and there's a place in the brain for them. And so I actually, things like gluttony, well, there's no demon of gluttony. You're just a glutton. You just want to eat too much. And that might be natural, because in the fall, animals and the early humans, you want to stock up on as much protein and sugars as you can for the winter. And that would lead to sometimes kind of a gluttonous attitude to gluttonous eating, wanting more than your share of something. So that passed over from hunter-gatherer culture into settled villages in the agrarian revolution. And there had to be boundaries set on behavior that weren't necessary to enforce in hunter-gatherer culture. And now you have people living next door to each other, maybe living in the same longhouse, and contributing their labor to agriculture. And then the proceeds of the agriculture, the grain or whatever, had to be stored and then it had to be distributed. So gluttony was all of a sudden not a survival mechanism. It was all of a sudden something that destroyed the culture and destroyed the cohesion of the community, of the village, and used up resources far too fast. So gluttony became a deadly sin because its manifestations were severely damaging to a village in that era. Nowadays, a glutton just has to earn enough money to eat 4 hamburgers instead of 1 or something, and he's satisfied. But we would say that was a demon of gluttony. It wasn't. It was a survival mechanism of gluttony from hunter-gatherer period that transferred into the agrarian reform period and became very, very negative. It was no longer about survival. Its survival was about meeting out the produce slowly so it would last all winter. So that became a demon, I suppose. And the problem with having all these theories about demons and the demonic is sort of like the problem with the God of the gaps. You say anything we don't at this moment understand, well, God did it, there's no question. And then a year later, some scientific breakthrough tells us exactly how that thing happens, and exactly why it happens. So our God of the gap theory takes a hit. The thing with the demonic, we have a sort of a spiritualism of the gaps thing going on here. And we need to be careful with that because it can cause a humongous amount of medical problems and societal problems that some people think that someone will say a psychopath. They'll think, oh, he's possessed by demons, that's why he's so evil. No, he's so evil because he can't, first of all, he has no capacity for empathy. And the problem is that the orbital medial prefrontal cortex is dysregulated, and the production of dopamine is dysregulated. So that causes the root cause of psychopathy, because with that part of the brain neutralized, the person makes not the best moral judgments, but he also has no capacity for empathy. And that's one of the big defining factors. So we know this is a electrochemical problem, and we can work on finding a solution or a cure. That's going to be one of our toughest nuts to crack, that particular one. But we can work toward it, toward a therapy for it. If we think it's just demons, we can get a rattle full of old bones and dance in a circle around the person, hoping to throw the demons out. Or if you're Pentecostal, you can shriek and howl by the bedside. Or in the Orthodox Church, you could make up a horrendous exorcism service, whereas the service for the healing of soul and body is quite enough. You don't need more than that. But we can make people more ill by having an exorcism service over a mentally ill person. So what I wanted to do is say, we need great caution in how we throw around the ideas of demons and the demonic. I mean, somebody could say their mother-in-law is a demon, and they don't literally mean that as a spiritual entity. But we might be crippling ourselves to deal with actual demonic by throwing it around too loosely and too lightly and claiming that mental illnesses or behavioral problems are demonic. Almost all of them are going to turn out to be atavistic. They're going to turn out to be throwbacks in evolution, evolutionary artifacts. And of course, we have to struggle very greatly to overcome those because they tend to break down civilization. And so when we talk about struggle or spiritual struggle, we're not just struggling against the demons as spiritual entities, we're also struggling against the things that we've carried with us from evolution that tend to be destructive and harmful in societies or cultures. So unless we know that, we don't know exactly how to direct our struggle, and we need always to seek professional interventions. When if we think we're possessed by demons, usually schizophrenic people often think they're possessed by demons. But if some priest says, well, oh, you must be possessed by demons, oh, good, go see a doctor. Go see a doctor first and foremost, because it might be a definable mental illness, and it might also be a brain tumor, something that happens. One priest had one time written that there's no such thing as depression, it's just a demonic temptation. Well, that literally can kill people, because the first symptom of Wilson's syndrome, which is a deadly illness, is depression. Someone said depression. The person becomes more and more depressed. And the longer he refrains from going to a doctor and seeking medical intervention, the more destructive and the more destruction is going to take place. And once we get medical intervention, when it's not too far gone, the disease can be slowed down. Some people say even stop, but I don't know. It can certainly be slowed down, and the effects can be minimalized. But if it's not treated, this person's going to build up a mass of copper in his cerebellum, and he's going to die from it. Eventually, it's going to affect his motor neurons, and he's going to eventually just die from it. But depression can also be caused by a brain tumor. Again, we know that pedophilia can be caused by a brain tumor, and so can depression. So, brain injury, not the ordinary depression like I lost my job or we're going to get a divorce. I mean, this deep-seated depression. When clinical depression is not treated, the hippocampi start to atrophy in the brain. So it causes brain damage not to treat. So rushing to say that his depression is caused by a demon, that can be fatal. We have to be very, very cautious in what we ascribe to demons. Sexual temptations are not demonic. Sexual temptations are they're more frequent among humans because humans don't go into heat or rut in order to breed. And the person who is sexually attracted, usually, ironically, a man sexually attracted to a woman whose body says that she'll be a good mother and be able to raise children, and a woman is attracted to a man who will give her strong children, fit children. So that's where a lot of our sexual attraction comes from. Even in animals, the female will sometimes choose the mate she wants to breed with because she's looking for some mate who's going to give her healthy and strong children. And that carries over into our humanity also. So we have to be careful with this ascribing demons and demonic temptations to things. There's a almost hysteria right now in the southern part of the United States about both witches and demons. And they can lead to atrocious civil situations. You can suddenly come up with people who are a little bit mentally addled who want to kill witches, because in the Old Testament it says, suffer no witch to live. They'll go out and try to kill witches. And the same thing with demons. I remember as a kid, there's a farmer named Corneli, who Cornell, I guess, and he was Romanian ancestry. Anyway, he had started going to a Pentecostal church and with tent revival thing, And he became so fearful of the end times. You know, it's such a big theme with these people, end times, rapture, and all of that. He became so intense about that and frightened of Antichrist that he went home and killed his wife and 3 children. And when the interrogator asked him, he said he wanted to protect them from Antichrist. He would kill them now while they were in Christ so that they wouldn't become the prey of Antichrist. And of course, he ended up in a mental institution. But that sort of thing can happen. And people who actually believe in witches and witchcraft, and you have quite a spate of this almost in witch hysteria in the South, they can end up actually murdering people thinking they're killing a witch. That certainly happened plenty of times in history, and can happen again in the present and in the future. So I just wanted to caution people about rushing into judgments of that sort, and preventing people from reaching medical professionals because they think they're demonized. And also looking at organizations like World Health Organization, the fellow says is demonic. Well, now we've heard 2 or 3 other MAGA politicians say the WHO is demonic, and the United States has withdrawn from the World Health Organization, which is one of the biggest life-saving constructs on Earth, and America is no longer contributing to it, and that of course is a net deficit for the world at large. So we want to caution everybody. I remember I think it was in the 70s, somebody decided that the Procter & Gamble's logo had the image of Antichrist on it. I mean, it did nothing of the kind, but they determined it did, and so the boycott of the company became so great that Procter & Gamble changed his logo because so many people were boycotting it on this idea that, oh, it's definitely the mark of the beast that's being featured on their logo. So you can get hysteria like that going. You can also get the kind of hysteria that wants you to go and kill witches yourself. It's happened in the past, happens in Africa quite often. And so we want to be very, very cautious about these subjects and not try to become too spiritual about them. And so.
Thank you, Your Eminence.